The night fell like a sentence over the Wexley Forest. A veil of creeping mist clung to the ground and stretched between the trees, turning trunks into pillars of a forgotten temple. The air smelled of ancient rain and iron, and every breath of wind seemed to carry secrets that refused to be deciphered. The distant crackling of breaking branches sounded like footsteps that didn't belong to any of the humans gathered. Ethan clutched the camera strap against his chest, trying to fix his focus on the exit that now seemed distant, and felt his skin recoil in small pinpricks. Maya, whose laughter used to fill silences, went quiet first. Her breathing became measured, almost mechanical, as if she were counting every second so as not to attract something the nocturnal listener might understand. Around them the firelight danced pale, devoured by shadows that took on indecipherable forms, sometimes resembling long, thin limbs, other times suggesting faces that had no right to exist there. The trail that had brought them, an earth road narrowing toward the heart of the forest, seemed to exhale behind them, closing with the sound of settling leaves. In silence, an old ruined mansion rose beyond the clearing, its empty windows like eyes that had watched for centuries. Ethan shivered, imagining stories no one dared to tell. The sensation settled in his throat, a metallic taste of warning. The trees whispered names in languages that seemed remembered from past lives. The group knew something was there, but the fear growing among them was subtler than any visible monster. It was the realization that the forest possessed a memory of its own, a will that needed only a human weight to awaken. The darkness was alive, and the clearing, as safe as it seemed under the trembling glow of the fire, was only an island of light, slowly filling with echoes. Ethan adjusted the lens as someone trying to see through a dream. Maya touched the pendant on her neck, a gesture of appeasement. They still didn't know that the night would release ancient things, and that each careless step would be recorded by wood and root, as if a contract were being written that could not be torn. The first manifestation of the horror was subtle, treacherous in its normality. There were no screams at first. There were glances. Aaron noticed it first. A long form between the trunks, a body that moved with slow, acquired motion, as if it were a shadow with human joints. He pointed, but when the group looked, there was nothing but a twisted trunk and moss. Ethan, anxious for proof, reviewed the footage on his camera and froze the frame. Just for a fraction of a second, there was a silhouette standing at the edge of the lake, so still it looked like mud mimicking human posture. When the frame advanced, it dissolved like smoke. Sophia heard the first laugh no one admitted making, a thin laugh that seemed to come from all directions at once. From then on, the forest began to respond to every human movement. A distant whistle mimicking one of their voices, the sound of footsteps on gravel that stopped every time someone turned around. Small objects moved. A compass that began pointing toward the inner forest, a map whose roots curved and unraveled beneath their fingers. Ethan's camera captured something even more disturbing. Reviewing earlier hours, he noticed the footage itself seemed to show subtle memory variations, out-of-time fragments, conversations that had never taken place at that campsite. Aaron dreamed of a child and awoke with hands stained with black soot. When Clara found a trail of footprints circling the fire pit, she realized they didn't belong to any known animal. They were long, with toes spreading into multiples, leaving behind crushed moss that emitted a scent both sweet and rotten. The first victim of the night wasn't a body. It was the group's trust, the certainty that they were there by choice, that they would return to the known world at dawn. Something there had begun working, with patience and cruelty, to erode that belief. The air contracted in pockets of cold that pierced clothes and skin, and every small sound became a clue that eyes watched from all dark points. The horror that manifested didn't want immediate acts of violence. It wanted to take memory, rewrite roots, and prepare their hearts for a deeper, more patient loss. Revelations about the curse came in fragments, as if the forest itself surrendered its secrets only when it felt it had total control over its audience. Among tangled roots, Ethan found an old diary, yellowed, with pages crumbling at the touch. The lines, written by an unsteady hand, told the story of a family, the Halversons, who had lived there for generations, guardians of a ritual that promised protection against the hunger of the land in exchange for human memories. As he read, the words seemed to resonate within his thoughts. The Halversons had learned to bend the memory of the trees, offering bitter and sweet memories so the forest could imprison them and transform them into something that kept the human presence near. It was a pact nourished by what was most intimate, memories of names, faces, smells, songs. With each offering, the forest grew in consciousness. But the diary revealed that when the offerings ceased being sincere, when they became forced, violence in exchange for protection, the forest began demanding more. Memories weren't enough. It needed possessions. And so over time, the Halversons changed. Faces once ordinary grew long features, sunken eyes, and the family isolated themselves, turning the clearing into a somber sanctuary where rituals were repeated that no one else understood. In another section, drawn in haste, there was mention of an amulet, a small metal disc marked with a symbol resembling a broken spiral. They said the amulet was a key and an anchor. Whoever wore it could offer memories more easily, but would also be bound to the place. Clara found fragments of fabric and animal bones near the ruined cabin, arranged in patterns resembling alphabets. Ethan's camera showed shadows forming gestures on the walls, as if there were a text written in missing light. As they pieced everything together, the truth became clear. The curse wasn't just a presence. It was a process of domesticating human experience. The forest had learned to devour memories to grow in power, and now, after centuries of rituals, had developed its own methods for extracting memories from those who ventured inside it. It wasn't just fear of what could kill, it was the horror of what could steal identity. And in understanding this, the group realized that any conventional attempt at fighting back would be useless. The forest's main weapon was invisible and intimate, and each memory lost was a missing part of themselves. The escalation of terror was relentless, a coherent succession of small tears that together turned people into shells. After discovering the nature of the pact, the group tried to react rationally, marking routes, leaving signs, attempting to follow the old map Ethan had captured on film. Nothing worked. Trails changed at night, the clearing seemed to shift, and the same stone they had walked around felt like a step they hadn't taken. Each escape attempt drew them closer to the root of the problem. The forest had already chosen targets. Aaron began forgetting names of family members. He could no longer remember the sound of his sister's laugh. Maya repeatedly woke up searching for objects that didn't exist. She swore she had lived a day that had actually been fabricated. Memories dissolved like sugar in hot water. In their attempt at resistance, they burned a piece of cloth marked with symbols, believing it would interrupt the ritual. The fire, instead of destroying, served as light for deeper revelations. Visions of people who had disappeared there, walking in slow motion among trees with empty expressions. Ethan's footage recorded overlapping voices, reciting names in loops, and faces that at night stepped over the marks of their own bodies. The consequences became irreversible for some. Clara, upon losing an essential fragment of memory, the name of her mother, began confusing realities, seeing the forest as home. Luke, who insistently tried to find the exit, became obsessed with a spot on the map that didn't exist. He walked in circles, paler each time, until he collapsed, remaining still for hours, as if awaiting an order. The forest amplified its hunger using those who had tried to fight it, turning them into instruments to capture more memories. Eyes that watched without remembering, hands that took and released without awareness. The amulet Sophia found revealed its price. Whoever touched it saw flashes of lives that weren't theirs, and then had those memories stolen. The group attempted improvised protection rituals, chants supposedly reversing the process. But each intonation seemed only to teach the forest how to respond better. The horror escalated to a civilizational level. It was not just about physical survival, but about remaining who they were. And when primordial memories began disappearing, the face of a child, the first kiss, the group's souls began to crumble. Some succumbed to slow deterioration, muttering steps among trees. Others went mad immediately, screaming for names they no longer remembered. The night stretched on endlessly, as if the clock had been ripped from its wrist. The final confrontation with the horror wasn't a battle of steel and fire. It was a clash of memories and intention. Ethan proposed something dangerous, using the camera to force remembrance, to record the ritual circle, display the footage and feedback, and confront the forest with the truth it tried to erase. The idea was simple in theory. If the forest fed on memory, perhaps a memory exposed at the same moment could force it to choose. Sophia, still trembling, explained the diary's mention of an inverted circle where memories were placed upside down and burned to break the bond. They decided to perform both actions, forcing revelation through image and burning symbols to confuse the mechanism. They gathered disturbed personal memories, a photograph, a note, a fragment of melody sung into the wind. They placed the objects in the circle and set up the cameras on improvised tripods. As Ethan played the footage loudly on loop, their faces distorted under the pressure of memories coming and going. The forest responded with new intensity. Branches moved in waves, and a tall figure emerged from the depths of the trees, not entirely human, not entirely shadow. Its body seemed woven from roots and memories. Wherever it passed, vegetation glowed with remnants of recollection. The group, diary in hand, recited the lines they believed could break the ritual. During the confrontation, each was struck by visions. Ethan saw his childhood fading. Maya felt the taste of her first kiss disappear. Aaron forgot his father's face for a moment and fell to his knees, roaring. Clara, shaking her head, tried to remain conscious, but with each spoken word, the force seemed to extract her identity. In a final, desperate act, Sophia held the amulet and threw it into the circle's fire, hoping its destruction would free the web of memories binding the forest. The amulet cracked and released a wave of light that sounded like a scream, and for an instant, the stolen memories blew back as if they were leaves. The figure at the edge of the circle hesitated. Ethan, seeing the chance, aimed the camera at the shadow's face, locking it in the lens. The recorded image showed not only the creature, but flashes of all the lives it had touched, like a mirror of loss. The forest, for what felt like a breath, wavered. But every act of rupture demanded a price. By the end of the confrontation, the clearing lay in ruins. The broken amulet had scattered residue that smelled of earth and iron. Some memories returned in sharp fragments, but never fully. The confrontation left an ambiguous trail, partial victory, with sacrifices none could describe without feeling the emptiness consuming their names. The ending was a page written with blood, silence, and stained memories. At dawn, when the first gray of the sky promised to reveal the damage, 3 figures staggered out of the clearing. Ethan, with the camera still on and the lens covered in soot. Clara, whose hands trembled around a note that no longer made sense. And Luke, limping, his skin marked with curves resembling maps of ancient rituals. What remained of Aaron and Maya were signs of struggle and nothing more. The forest returned some sounds, but no intact bodies. Sophia stayed behind, motionless, her eyes empty as if she no longer belonged to the living. They reached the road like castaways, hands full of dirt and loose memories. Ethan's footage, when later reviewed, showed disjointed images, moments of pure horror, faces of friends dissolving, and in the end a blank frame trembling as if pulsing with longing. Local media spoke of a missing group, stories split between collective madness and a tragic accident. Some looked at the clearing and saw only ruins and old trees. Others, more sensitive, claimed they heard at night a whisper like people calling names that didn't exist in known languages. Over time, Wexley's story became local legend. Warning and temptation, a clearing where memories were currency and where curiosity and despair paid the price. But for those brave enough to watch Ethan's recordings, there is something more. Among the frames, at times, a figure approaches the camera, not as a direct threat, but as one seeking recognition. And in the last scene, before the tape ends in white, someone, perhaps Ethan, perhaps the forest itself, whispers a nameless name and the film cuts. Whoever watches feels a cold that lingers. It is the sensation that something, somewhere, has memorized your name and waits patiently, because memories are easy food for the night that never dies. Ethan never truly left the forest, even after the rescue teams declared him psychologically compromised but physically unharmed. The doctors couldn't diagnose the sensation he described. A pressure behind the eyes, like a memory waiting to bloom. For weeks, he avoided mirrors. Every time he faced his own reflection, it flickered, just slightly, like a frame misaligned in an old tape. Clara tried to convince him it was trauma, nothing more. Luke refused to talk about Wexley entirely, drinking every night until sleep dragged him under like a black tide. But the forest had not finished with them. It began on a night when the rain came down in unnaturally soft sheets, more like the breath of something enormous exhaling above the clouds. Ethan was cataloging footage, trying to piece together timelines that never stayed the same for more than an hour. The videos rearranged themselves as if reacting to his thoughts. Clips that had once shown only darkness now revealed silhouettes, longer, thinner, swaying as if listening. At 3:14 a.m., he paused on a single frame. A face stared back, not the creatures, not one of his friends. It was Ethan himself, but older, hollow-eyed, standing deeper in the forest than he had ever filmed. And behind the future Ethan, barely visible, were dozens of other versions of him, each captured at a slightly different angle, as though the forest had been recording him long before he brought a camera of his own. The moment he blinked, the frame vanished, replaced by static that pulsed like a heartbeat. The next day, Clara arrived at his apartment trembling. "Ethan, I think something's wrong with my memory again." She opened her palm. Inside it lay a small pile of dirt, dark, damp, unmistakably from the clearing. "I woke up holding this," she whispered, "and I don't sleepwalk." Luke appeared 2 days later. His eyes had changed, pupils too dilated, irises faintly reflecting light like an animal caught in headlights. He said he had driven past Wexley on instinct, without meaning to, and something in the trees had called him by a name he didn't recognize. That night, the three gathered in Ethan's living room, desperation overriding fear. They played the footage again. This time, when the video glitched, a voice whispered through the speakers, "You brought us out, but we cannot live here. Bring us back." Clara covered her ears, shaking violently. Luke leaned closer, as if in a trance. Ethan felt his mind stretch thin, like skin pulled over too many bones. The lights flickered. A slow, rhythmic tapping began on the window. Tap, tap, tap. None of them moved. The tapping shifted, now coming from the door, then from the ceiling, then from underneath the floorboards, as though the house itself were being tested for weak points. Ethan muted the video. The tapping stopped. They stared at each other, breath shallow. Finally, Clara said what none dared speak. "It followed us." Luke nodded, but his eyes didn't focus correctly anymore. "No," he murmured, voice distant. "It came home with us." That night, Clara stayed over, too afraid to drive. Luke sat in the corner, rocking slightly, whispering to himself. Ethan dreamt of the forest. Not as it had been, but as it would be. He saw the roots expanding beneath towns, weaving under streets, wrapping around foundations. He saw people wandering highways with blank expressions, memories dripping from their minds like melting wax. He saw himself, hundreds of him, walking in a line into the deeper woods, each version more drained and hollow than the last. When he awoke, his camera was turned on, recording, even though he hadn't touched it. He approached it with dread. The display showed a single frame, the clearing. But this time, something was different. Sophia was standing in the center of it, her back turned, hair unmoving in the windless dark, her hand lifted as if beckoning him closer. Slowly she turned her head, not all the way, just enough to reveal her jaw stretched impossibly wide, as though her mouth were learning a new shape. A whisper curled out of the speakers. "Come, remember, the forest is hungry again." The room's temperature dropped. Clara jolted awake with a scream, not of fear but of recognition, as if a stolen memory had suddenly slammed back into her mind. "We have to go back," she sobbed. "It won't stop until we return what it gave back." Luke stood, swaying, his voice no longer entirely his own. "It marked us. We're not finished." And Ethan, shaking, sweating, breath shallow, realized the truth blooming behind his eyes. The forest didn't simply take memories, it planted them. And now, whatever had taken root inside them was ready to grow. They returned to Wexley on the coldest night of the year. Not because they wanted to, but because the forest had hollowed them out until resistance was impossible. Each of them carried pieces of memories that didn't belong to them, names whispered in dreams, visions of strangers' lives, fragments of lullabies never sung by their own mothers. The boundary between their minds and the forest's will had grown thin, elastic, ready to snap. Luke drove. He didn't speak the entire trip. His hands were rigid on the wheel, knuckles pale as bleached bone. His pupils no longer shrank in the light. They absorbed it, swallowing reflections whole. Clara sat in the back seat, trembling, muttering numbers under her breath, counting something unseen. Ethan watched the road ahead, yet felt the forest long before he saw it. It pulsed, like an organism anticipating food. When they reached the old trail, the mist thickened into a wall of white. They left the car's headlights on. The forest returned the gesture by dimming them slowly, as if inhaling the light. "Do you hear it?" Clara asked. Ethan listened. And yes, there was something. Not wind, not animals, memories, a chorus of them. Whispers of every person who had vanished here. Luke stepped forward. "We're late," he said, in a voice that belonged to more than one throat. The trees parted for them, not metaphorically, physically. Branches curled back like fingers welcoming their owners home. Roots shifted beneath their feet, forming a deliberate path toward the clearing. When they reached it, the fire pit from months ago still smoldered. Ashes glowed faintly, as though the fire had never died. And standing at the center, exactly where the camera had shown her, was Sophia. Her eyes were black mirrors, reflecting no light. Her skin had taken on the tone of the forest floor, streaked with green and gray. Veins moved beneath her surface like fine roots searching for purchase. "You came back," she whispered, voice layered with dozens of others. "Good." Clara fell to her knees. Luke walked forward as if pulled by strings. Ethan remained frozen, his breath shaking his ribs. Sophia extended her hand toward him. "You stole what was not yours," she said. "You took memories the forest had chosen to keep. Now you must return them." Ethan shook his head. "I didn't steal anything. It took from us." Sophia smiled, a slow, cracking movement. "The forest takes what it needs, and it leaves something in return. You are seeds, Ethan. You all were." She gestured around them. Dozens of figures emerged from the tree line. Some were clearly human, at least once had been. Their bodies were elongated, bent, their limbs moving in drawn-out arcs, as though time itself passed slower for them. Their faces were blank slates of pale bark, etched only with faint lines resembling smiles or sorrow. Others were nearly indistinguishable from trees, torsos merging with trunks, arms branching, eyes embedded like knots in wood. They circled the trio silently. Luke took Sophia's hand without hesitation. Clara sobbed uncontrollably, clutching her head. Ethan stepped back, but the earth rose behind him, blocking escape. "You brought the forest beyond itself," Sophia said. "Your memories wandered outside. That is a wound, and wounds must close." She pointed at Ethan's camera, hanging around his neck. "It began with that. Show it to us." He didn't move. The forest did. Roots snaked around his feet, climbing his legs, cold and pulsing. The camera turned on by itself. The screen glowed with a single frame, Ethan standing in the clearing, this clearing, surrounded by figures identical to himself. Then another frame, and another, each image older, more decayed, more wooden. Sophia whispered, "Choose which one you are." Ethan screamed. The frames accelerated, hundreds, thousands, each version losing more humanity, until the final image showed a tall, bark-skinned creature with hollow eyes. "Stop," he begged. The screen obeyed, and reflected back a version of himself he had not yet become, but would. Sophia cupped his face gently, like a mother to a child. "You are almost ready." Clara's counting ceased. She rose unsteadily, approaching the circle of figures. Her eyes were unfocused, but her steps were sure. Luke stood beside Sophia, smiling faintly, his teeth too sharp. The forest pulsed again. A memory surged into Ethan's mind. His childhood bedroom, the smell of rain, his mother calling his name. He clung to it desperately, but the forest tugged harder. "Give it back," Sophia whispered. "It belongs to us now." Ethan fell to his knees as the memory ripped away, leaving a cold cavity in its place. His vision blurred, his hands stiffened. Bark bloomed along his wrists. "No," he murmured. "Please." But the forest did not deal in mercy. It dealt in balance. A final whisper filled the clearing, spoken by every tree, every creature, every version of Ethan that had ever walked here. "Become what you remember." And the transformation completed. His scream echoed once, then merged with the countless others trapped in the roots of Wexley. When dawn finally came, there were no footprints leading out of the forest. Only 3 new trees in the clearing, their bark patterned with faint, sorrowful faces. And if one stands close enough, with the wind low and the forest listening, those trees whisper names. Sometimes yours,